Welcome back to the Ripewave audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we are going over the new McIntosh Labs AV receiver, the MHT300. And you heard me correct, this is an AV receiver, not a processor. For the home theater solutions that McIntosh has put out, we're accustomed to seeing processors in recent years, but now they introduce their receiver at $8,000, and this is available to their authorized dealers. So don't expect to see this online retailers. This would be through their specific authorized channel. And the other interesting thing is this is the first product we're seeing from McIntosh with DIRAC room correction, not Odyssey or Room Perfect as they normally have. So let's take a look at how we've got here. In 2020, McIntosh came out with their MX100 as an entry level, at least entry into the McIntosh world at $5,000 with 13 channels of processing and balanced outputs. And this very slim looking processor that they had really just focused on the digital domain, no analog inputs of any sort, no phono input, no RCA inputs, just pure HDMI inputs and digital coax and Toslink connections for this processor. So this MX100 has been serving as their entry level to the McIntosh world for the home theater processing. But what if they were to include amplifiers? Now, amplifiers with McIntosh are also often above a lot of people's price range. They do have the MI347, which sells for $5,500, gives 7 channels of amplification at 125 watts apiece. This is a Class D amplifier from them. And so if you need a lot of channels for a home theater setup from McIntosh, this unit serves that purpose. But what if we take the MX100 and amplifiers and put them into one unit and make an AV receiver? This is what they're trying to do with the MHT300 AV receiver. Now, I can't say that this is the same amplifiers that you find in the MI347, but what gives you an idea of the value here, with the MX100 priced at $5,000, this just being $3,000 more for 7 channels of amplification at 150 watts per channel. And so this gives you extreme value, considering that the lowest cost of entry per channel up until this point for an amplifier separate from McIntosh was the MI347 at $5,500. When paired with an MX100, that would take you over $10,000. And here they are launching the MHT300 at $8,000. And so this is 150 watts into 7 channels. It uses the same remote as the MX100. You can see that it's a little taller here than the other unit. And on the back of it, you can see the 7 sets of binding posts for your outputs to your speakers. Just above those binding posts, they have something unique, not just a separate output for if you want to do pre-outs from this, use an external amplifier, but they have a pre-in if you have a new processor in the future and you want to still leverage the amplifiers within the MHT300 for use with another processor. You can feed this with RCA inputs. Now, unlike the MX100, there are no balanced outputs. Everything is unbalanced, either in or out of this unit. But like the MX100, we are entirely in the digital domain for source inputs. So all HDMI, Toslink, or coax digital inputs on this unit. Now, looking at it side by side with the MX100 that was released 3 years ago, and you can see has that classic McIntosh look on both of them. And the MHT300 looks like a taller version of the MX100 with similar knobs and displays. Turning them around to the back, you can see the clear difference of having the speaker terminal outputs versus the balanced outputs of the MX100. Both are 13 channels of processing, so they are very similar to that regard. The other thing that I do see different on the new MHT300 is a place for an FM antenna input. So this will have an FM tuner built into it, which we typically don't see in a McIntosh processor. Now, looking at the McIntosh line entirely here, we can further see the value. Their processors starts with the MX100, works up to the MX180 to $17,000. So this sits on the lower end of their scale, plus gives you those channels of amplification. Of course, the MX123 sitting in between there at $9,000. The prices have come up since we did our review of the MX180 in 2022, so here a year later, we'll see higher prices from what I did previously with a report on McIntosh. Now, I'll also call attention to the units that the 180 and the 123 are derived from. So the MX123 gets technology from Marantz. This is very much close to the configuration of a Marantz AV8805A. Of course, McIntosh does some of their own treatments, such as their classic styling on the front panel, and a little different layout of the back panel as well. And some internals we understand are really of McIntosh design, but they are taking a lot of the base technology from Marantz. Likewise, with the MX180, they borrowed technology from Lyngdorf, which is the MP-60 2.1. The 2.1 is the HDMI 2.1 version of that product. So that is quite a bit different looking on the outside, being a little slimmer on the Lyngdorf than the McIntosh. But again, derived from a third-party product. Now, in both cases, the McIntosh versions are more expensive. The MX123 is $9,000 versus the $5,500 version that's from Marantz. And then on the MX180, you have $17,000 versus $15,000. As far as the MX100 and the MTH300, we don't know if the MX100 or the MTH300 are derived from other products like the 123 and the 180. However, they very well could. We just don't see any evidence out there. So if you know, please share that with us. That would be very helpful. As far as we can tell, the MTH300 is derived from the MX100, but with the difference of having DIRAC room correction versus Odyssey that is in the MX100. Now, given that the MX100 had Odyssey, we had a little bit of thought that it may have been Marantz like the 123, but there's some other differences there that steered us away from Marantz because the menu pages are so different. And the MTH having DIRAC, well, that could still be Marantz because now Marantz is partnered with DIRAC as a paid option, but in this case, DIRAC is included. Now let's take a look at how these all compare, including the derived units from Lyngdorf and Marantz. And we can see the MTH300 column there with the green nuke indicating that. And of course, on the speaker layout, they're orange because they're powered by this unit versus the other ones being either gray or blue, meaning that it is the pre-out that is happening there with those processor-only models. The blue ones are, of course, the channels that are configurable versus fixed, as you have some choices of whether you're using front wides or overhead speakers, another row, etc. There, but you can see that the MTH300 has 7 channels of amplification, so the remaining 4 for the ceiling speakers will have to come from external amplifiers, so they're colored in gray. But these are all true 7.2.4 configuration where you have two independent subwoofer channels as indicated in the green font. So this is the MTH300, and then with the MX100 supports the same speaker configuration, 7.2.4, just everything needs to be powered externally. And then you can go back to the other videos we had on the 180, etc., to get a little more detail there, but essentially the high end will support up to 5 subwoofers, but you're trading off because you only have 16 channels of processing. So if you're going to do more subwoofers with independent control, then you're not going to do as many rows of height speakers or the front wides, and you have to give and take there. And then similarly with the MX123, you're getting nice layouts just like the 180. You know, you can do up to a 9.2.4, but you just don't have as many options for subwoofer outputs. So you're limited to just 2 independent subwoofer outputs. Of course, you can do a splitter on those if you wanted to add more to your system. Let's say you had 1 for each corner. That could still be done, but there would be only still 2 independent channels. And this goes across the board for any of these where you want to do more than what's supported for outputs on subwoofers. Now, when it comes to the processing formats, they all do Dolby Atmos and DTS:X. That seems to be the bar of not just for McIntosh, but any brand you look at always seems to have those two for a home theater processor or receiver nowadays. The question always comes down, does it support DTS:X Pro and Auro3D, which the MTH300 does not, nor does the MX100. You have to then move up to the 123 or the 180 to get those formats supported. None of the McIntosh processors or this new receiver have a headphone jack on them. But where this MTH300 is unique is it has an FM tuner built in, but not an AM tuner. Now, if you want to add a tuner or a headphone jack to any of these, of course, McIntosh has separate devices for those. They have an AM/FM tuner that sells for $5,500 and a headphone amplifier, which is at the same price. So you're adding $11,000 of equipment just to get those 2 features added using exclusively McIntosh products. I assume that not everybody is ready to spend that type of money for that type of device. But they all have a removable power cord, and the power requirements, now some are auto switching like the new MTH300 and the 180, but the other models, the 123 and the MX100, appear to be what gets determined at the factory, whether you're going to get 110 or 220 volt input for these units. Looking more at formats, now the only ones that advertise IMAX Enhance are the MX123. So this new unit does not have IMAX Enhance listed. That does show Dolby Vision support, as all models do. And on the calibration, this is where we see this variation. So the MX100 and the MX123 both had Odyssey support, and the MX180 had Room Perfect, naturally, because they get it from Lyngdorf. But this unit is the first one, and we believe the only one that McIntosh has that's DIRAC Live capable. Now, there's no mention if there's multi-base support on this. We went on the DIRAC website. Usually if there's a paid option, there's within the DIRAC store, the unit is listed under the brand. There's nothing listed under McIntosh on the DIRAC website at this time. There's no mention for single or multi-sub base enhancement, so we don't really know what capabilities are in this MTH300 or if something is planned for the future. Now, none of these are THX certified. We only see that with the Onkyo, Pioneer, and Integra brands. Of course, all under the Vox International family of products nowadays. As far as the DACs, We only know that the MX123 is using an ES9028 Pro chip. We don't know what's in this new model or any of the others from McIntosh. But we do see that it has a published signal to noise of 96 dB, as we do see for all other units from McIntosh, and a 0.005% total harmonic distortion, with PCM coming in at 24,192, but no listed DSD support, as we see with the Marantz made MX123. If they do support DSD, but just simply don't mention it on their websites or their manual, that would be helpful feedback for us to see. As far as I/O, the MTH300 has 4 HDMI inputs, 1 output, just like the MX100. It also has 2 coax and 2 Toslink optical outputs, again, just like the MX100. Where it differs is on the outputs. So the MX100 as a processor has 11.2 balanced outputs, whereas this new unit does not. And as far as multi-channel outputs, it's 11.2 unbalanced. And of course you have the unbalanced inputs available for those 7 channels of amplification. So if you want to leverage these amplifiers as just an amplifier and not a receiver. So 7 channels there. And of course, if you need more I/O than this, you have the other models from McIntosh up to its flagship. But even the MX123 has, let's say, more of certain outputs and inputs, like it supports 7 HDMI in, 3 out, and on that product. And where the 180 is really different is it does have that ABS EBU input on that model. So that's unique that it inherits from the Lyngdorf design. With the video capabilities, we talked about the 4 in, 1 out. Those are all 8K capable. So unlike the MX123, where it had 7 HDI inputs and 3 outputs, only 1 of those inputs were 8K capable and 2 outputs. And of course, with the Marantz unit that it's derived from, there's this VS3003 port expander, so you can get actually 3 inputs that are 8K. But I'm not sure that's available for the McIntosh version, the MX123. So that might only be available for the Marantz version, the AV8805A. But all of these units otherwise have capability of 8K, except for the MX100. So while this is derived from the MX100, here's another difference. This has 8K versus the MX100 is still 4K 60 only. They all have eARC output there, so you do have that capability in all these models. What we don't know is the HDMI 2.1 feature set it really supports. I can't find any documentation, website, manual, sales sheet, whatever, what have you. We might assume that it has everything that the other ones do, like variable refresh rate, quick media switching, QFT, ALLM, and DSC, but they just don't list it. So if you have that knowledge, again, please share that with us. And then on HDR format, they all have hybrid log gamma, HDR, HDR10 plus, except for the new MTH300 and the MX100 don't talk about HDR10 plus. So it may not have that support. They all support Dolby Vision, as we mentioned before, and the new versions don't have IMAX Enhanced. Again, we had mentioned that earlier. They're all copy protection 2.3, except for the MX100. Of course, it's on that earlier HDMI standard, so it's only 2.2. They all have a wired Ethernet connection but not every unit has wireless. That can only be found in the MX123, where it's getting ABGN Wi-Fi and 4.2 Bluetooth in from a mobile device using SBC, and that codec is not the strongest one. I'm not a big believer of using Bluetooth other than for convenience, especially if it doesn't have something like aptX HD for the codec. And none of the specialized networking standards for audio are supported here. As far as control, the Marantz derived MX123 has the most support. Marantz spends a lot of time developing the software for all this, for Alexa, Google, Siri, Josh, I/O, etc. And the integrations, they claim more integrations versus McIntosh really only talks about Control 4 and its certification for Control 4. You know, you might have support for the others, but they're just not listing it in their documentation as Marantz does. And of course, you have serial protocol support, not just the Ethernet. Triggers on these, there's 2 output triggers on the new MTH300 and the MX100, as well as the 123. You get a little more on your triggers with the MX180. And as far as streaming ecosystems, the only one we see support for Roon and Spotify and Sonos is for the MX123. Again, they benefit from Marantz's work there. We're not seeing anything listed on the MTH300, and it may be due in part for the lack of wireless support, although they do have that wired connection. And of course, Marantz has their HEOS ecosystem, which I'm not sure is fully available for the MX123, but perhaps it is. And again, for all the internet streaming capabilities, there's nothing really native in these Macintosh's devices that is listed. So it would assume then that maybe it doesn't have the HEOS support with Macintosh. Looking at the remotes, Macintosh has standardized on the same remote. I think it says HRC085 on the remote model number, but the only one that's different is the Marantz-derived MX123, which is really just a rebranded version of the Marantz remote on that product. Interesting to, at this point, we're waiting to see if Macintosh revamps some of the other products that they have to see if they will add DIRAC into them, like we've seen with Marantz with their new Cinema range, or even Denon for that. But do they redo the MX123 to adopt some of those new capabilities that Marantz put into their Cinema range, right up to the AV10? So we'll see what happens there. As far as physical dimensions, the MTH300 is a little taller than the MX100 and a little shorter than the MX123 or 180. Depth-wise, it's not as deep as the MX100 at 14.9 inches, 380 millimeters, and it's pretty much standard width, although this is a little narrower at 17.1 inches, 435 millimeters. On the weight, when you place this on the scale, it weighs 21.6 pounds or 9.8 kilograms. So slightly more weight than the MX100, but not as much as the 123. Although with the 7 amplifiers built into us, they're definitely not heavy amplifiers if it's only a few pounds more than the MX100 and less than the 123. We don't know the power consumption. They do not list that in their manuals. They do say standby power is 0.5 watts, which is pretty standard for Macintosh. It is made in the US from both local and internationally sourced parts. and has a 3-year warranty, which is standard for McIntosh. Looking at a little bit on the UI, we can see some of these differences between their flagship, their mid-range, and these entry-level ranges. They each seem to have their own menu pages. The 123, of course, mirroring a lot of what that Marantz looks like with the Odyssey setup in its screens. The 100 and the 300 share the same menu pages, albeit when you go into room calibration, you get Odyssey with the 100 and DIRAC with the 300. And of course, the 180 has the Lyndorf room perfect correction there, and screens that look like a Lyngdorf. As far as mobile apps, I'm really not sure if the 300 is going to have support for the Apple iOS-based McIntosh app. It might. There's nothing listed there, and we don't see any updated versions of the app in the last few years on the Apple website. This app doesn't seem to be as fully functional as what you get from Marantz. And that kind of wraps it up for this overview of the MHT300. What are your thoughts with this new entry with an AV receiver from McIntosh? And they're hitting that $8,000 price point, which today doesn't seem too far stretched considering that brands like Marantz have now gone over the $7,000 mark with a processor only, and this having 7 amplifiers in it from McIntosh could make this attractive, a better entry point for those looking to jump into McIntosh that couldn't do so in the past. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you like what they put in for feature sets? Do you particularly like the ability to use this as an amplifier only should the processor outgrow in a few years with modernization as it happens, but you still have access to those 7 channels of amplifications at 150 watts apiece? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and consider joining our Patreon channel. And if you want to take a more modest approach and just do us one-time donation with the thanks button, that would be appreciated as well. But you can always hit that bell notification so you are reminded when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.